There's this one question which I ask every single React developer in an interview-based setting, and I want to share that question with you. Let's take a look at if you are able to understand this question properly, because if you do, you understand the core of React very well. And this is, I think, the most important question which probably you should be knowing the answer of, because if you're sitting for an interview or in general, if you are just preparing React, this is like a very fundamental question in React's ecosystem. So let's go ahead and discuss this question. So the question very simply is as follows. You have to explain the difference, the real difference between class-based components and functional components. So what exactly on a technical level, not on the syntax or the keyword is class and this and that, not on that level, but actually how React fundamentally differs in these two modes when you're operating in class-based versus when you're operating in functional components mode. So I mean, in general, if you are a new React developer, there is a slight chance that you never really tried class-based components. So in that case, you probably would, the question would just be framed again in a way that you should tell how functional components work. But in general, if you're curious enough and you know how functional component works, you would also appreciate how class-based components used to work. In this video, let's just go ahead and actually understand what kind of answer would really impress me or your interviewer or somebody who knows the difference between these two things. If you're new here, make sure you leave a like, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon. This is free of cost and helps the channel grow. So before getting into this, let me just go ahead and give you a quick device or a recheck of what exactly is a component in React, right? Speaking on a higher level, a component is anything in the UI which is probably mounted on the screen as a UI element, right? If that is not mounted on the screen, or if that is just a utility function, then well, it's a function, right? A component is something which either returns a JSX element or returns null, right? So JSX element or null is a valid return value from a component in React. And this return value, I'm talking about functions. In case of class-based components, a component, technically speaking, is any class which extends the React component superclass and also has a render method that also returns these two values, right? So once we are clear on that distinction, that functional components are these pieces, now let's understand how fundamentally a component differs. Alright, so right now we have two modes of component as you can see on the screen. The first one is a class-based component and the second one is a functional-based component, right? And both use some sort of internal state in the component. Now the real difference between a class-based component and a functional-based component is that when you call a line like this.setState something, right? What you are effectively telling React in a declarative fashion, not in an imperative fashion, that this component needs a re-render, probably, right? Because this part would be used somewhere in the UI, although I'm not using it right now. It's just a little bad example, but if this part is used somewhere in the UI, you probably want a re-render. Why? Because that is when the component would update and the screen would show the user the new UI. Similarly, whenever you call setState 100, whatever the new value is, this component would also try to re-render. The fundamental difference here is that this class-based component would be mutated and this functional-based component is not mutated. So what do I mean by that? That means that when you call this.setState, whatever internally React has created an object for this class, which is displayed on the screen. So let's say this is like a screen scr obj, right? If React initialized it something like new C1, right? Whatever, and this initialized. When you call this setState right here of A5, what React internally is doing is that it's saying scr obj dot state, let's say, dot a is equal to 5, right? Internally, I mean, obviously this is not simplified and this is like just a dummy code, but it is mutating, it is changing that value on the same variable, right? That means this A1 is lost. This is literally lost and you cannot like somehow do some magic to recover this. I mean, until you store it somewhere and do all sorts of sorcery. But the idea here is that React mutates the state of a class-based component and then re-renders it. On the other hand, the functional components work in a slightly different way. The functional components are called again with updated state values. So what do you mean by that? That means that this function right here, app, was called and is mounted on the screen as a single node. Once that behavior is changed, what happens is that this set state function right here, actually, whatever the value you pass in, this actually goes ahead and tells React that, hey, I want to update this function call. So what React would do is it's gonna call this app function again to get the new render tree from this function. And what it's gonna do is it's gonna replace all these calls of useState with the new variable. That is why you are also able to use const here, because you never really mutate this x right here inside the function. Technically speaking, you can't even, right? Because this x is like a private variable of this function, right? So in the JavaScript world, you don't easily and directly would have access to this. But this dot state, I mean, this is like a property of the object, so it can be done. But this right here, that's why this is const, because it stays the same in the previous render of the function. In the next call of the function, this whole useState of 0, it's just equivalent to 100 written here. Not even useState of 100, just 100, right? Because useState of 0 would actually return you 100 on the second render or whenever this is called. This is a completely new function, right? So what this means, if you are doing any sort of side effects in an older render of the function, for example, timers or event listeners on the body, then it is very, very possible, even 100% sure, that these timers and event listeners would not be cleared by default. Why? Because this function is pretty much ignored. The old function is pretty much ignored. It would be destroyed, garbage collected by JavaScript whenever the time comes. But if you're having any sorts of leaks or anything, that would stay here. So in this way, your function variables are never really mutated, the function state variables. And on every single run, on every single render, you get a clean function tree. You get a clean UI tree from that particular functional component. Whereas in this case, you only have a single object which gets mutated over and over and over again. And this is how a class-based component differs from a functional component in a technical sense. Plus, of course, you would have a completely different architecture altogether. If you dive deep into the function itself, you have the support of hooks. You have, the ability to not have a lot of the JSX hell, which people talk about, that you have a lot of dependency, which is like higher order components embedded inside higher order components and so on. So this is how class-based components used to work before, if you wanted to, let's say, set up Redux or, any sort of thing which needed to pass some data down the store. In this case, in the functional component case, we have pretty much hooks for most of the things, right? Which allows us to skip this whole render tree kind of hell. But yeah, in general, the functional components is the future of React. So if you have not made the switch yet, I would suggest to go ahead and start learning about functional components. Super interesting, super useful, and React would probably be I won't say like exactly ditching class-based components, but I mean, you would not be hearing any sort of great new feature or performance enhancement in this area. Although Facebook and React internally also use a lot of legacy code on this, but still you should be focused on functional-based components now. So that is all for this video. Let me know if you were able to understand something new, something interesting, and if you did, make sure you leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon. You know the drill. That is all for this one, and I'm gonna see you in the next video really soon. If you're still watching this video, make sure you comment down in the comment section, I watched this video till the end. Also, if you're not part of CodeDamm's Discord community, you're missing out a lot on events which we organize on a weekly basis to code. You already know the drill. Make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and thank you so much for watching.